Greetings. I'd like to focus our attention on this particular video on ethics and policy and the whole idea of how important it is to assess any policy in terms of ethical concerns. First we might ask, is the policy ethical, and how do we know? How do we evaluate whether it's ethical or not, and how do we correct policies that may actually be unethical? So this gets us into the whole idea of thinking about ethics and also thinking about the relationships between ethics, laws, morals, values, and other variables which might be of interest and importance in trying to assess whether or not a policy is ethical. For some reason I don't see a lot of that occurring. I don't hear people saying, well, let's analyze this policy in terms of the ethical aspects of it. Is it ethical, unethical? How do we know? Do we have any debate on it or not? A lot of times all we hear is this policy is bad or this policy is good, end of story. And I think that's very short-sighted, and we need to really take a close look at the ethics. And what do we value? What does the meaning of that? Let me give you an example that relates not necessarily to policy but to law, and that is a recent case of a person who engaged in some criminal behavior, bullying, if you will, was court ordered to stand or to sit at a busy intersection with a sign stating that he was a bully. And he had other criminal justice consequences as well. But my question, of course, is if that was a policy, or given that situation, I would ask the question, is that ethical, or did that actually increase or encourage bullying by others who came by to call him, some names, or to swear at him or throw something at him and so on? And did it serve the purpose? Is it going to stop this guy's bullying? So a lot of times we have to really sit back and carefully assess whether or not what our policy consequences are ethical or not as well. That one of the things we can do is look at the history of the policies and related policies and ethical concerns. And then of course we have to define what we consider to be our working model of how we determine what is ethical and what is not ethical. Now, if we look at some guidelines or some indicators, some variables, whatever you want to call these, to use, this might be helpful. So I want to go over these real briefly. For example, does the policy allow people to make their own decisions and choices? Does it allow them to be autonomous? Does the policy cause harm to others? Or does the policy prevent harm? Or what kind of harm might it cause? We begin to ask these questions. Does the policy allow one to maintain their right to privacy? This of course may be within limits, but what is the nature of privacy violations with this policy? And I think this is becoming much more relevant today as we see much technology. Interesting article in the New York Times this past Sunday on whether or not it was ethical to engage in online surveillance that was legal to do regarding corporations or other people, and publishing information and so forth, the ethical aspects of that. So the privacy issue, of course, and also, does the person have the right, the policy, does the person have the right to receive a particular benefit or care? And we see this discussed much more in the medical field, but I would certainly bring it into criminal justice. For example, you might say, what are the rights of prisoners to receive mental health care, for example? Or in their post-prison experience, what is the right of ex-prisoners to receive follow-up mental health care? And you get into a lot of debates about this in terms of, well, is it beneficial? Who benefits by? What kind of benefits? What are the costs? What are other things we could do instead? And you really begin to see this play out. is the policy, lead to equality? Does it allow, or does it really encourage and set up a system of equal justice for all, or does it lead to, let's say, inequalities, or some benefit more than others? Also, there's a aspect of loyalty and commitment related to policies. For example, if we have a policy that we implement that has been shown not to work, how do we make that into an ethical debate? That is it unethical to fund a program that doesn't work? Or I should say, how do we address that and deal with that aspect? For example, I know a program very close to where I live that has been shown over and over and over again not to have any effectiveness. But yet, taxpayers' money is still spent to implement this program. And my question is that ethical? And someone would say, well, it's not ethical to go after that program because people like that program. It makes them feel good. Well, so does Ben and Jerry's ice cream. But the whole point here is, what are the ethical limitations and debates and consequences of running a program that has been shown to be ineffective? And accountability. This is a big one too. That we expect others to provide reasonable and accurate information, and people to take responsibility for their actions in policy making, policy implementation, evaluating the research on policies. And so I think those are some good guidelines to begin to look at policies and to begin to think about what's ethical and what's not, and how to evaluate, and of course what to do about it. Howard Gardner, in his book 5 Minds for the Future, published in 2008. This is the same Howard Gardner who wrote Changing Minds, which was one of the textbooks used in my class, and Howard Gardner also has another book. If you like Howard Gardner's work, then of course I encourage you to continue reading his material. Obviously, I like his work and I find it very, very useful. But Howard Gardner talks about the ethical mind in one of the chapters, and looking at one's formal education, how that relates to ethics, and looking at the core values of one's profession. That all professions have code of ethics, I would hope. Certainly, criminal justice professionals, there's a code of ethics that are generated by the major criminal justice organizations. There's code of ethics for police officers, for corrections officers, for mental health counselors, for social workers, and so on. And then also to look at support systems to support ethical behavior, and look at transparency in regards to determining ethical practices. And then Howard Gardner asks regarding different behaviors, or in our case we'll say policies, does it pass the hypocrisy test? Kidder, in an article in 1995, Tough Choices, Why It's Getting Harder to Be Ethical, published in The Futurist, again, a 1995 article, rather old by our standards, but I think, again, very interesting because some of the same questions come up. Will we face new ethical issues? That's an ongoing question you can pose any particular time that's relevant. And also, Kidder states that the moral intensity will increase, and I think that's very relevant to look at again, and to take a look at those features about the morality issues and new related ethical issues related to computing, medicine, the environment, and criminal justice. And I would say, how do those all interrelate? Also, we see that Kidder talks about increased pressure to drop out and form our own groups and places. Will that, occur, or will we see more collaboration and work? Also, we can take a look at technology assessment and some of the issues related there related to information, influence, and power. And this is from Palm and Hanson's 2006 work on ethical technology assessment. And they provide a checklist looking at things such as the use of information, influence, impact on social contact, privacy, sustainability, human reproduction, gender, minorities and justice, and international relations and impact on human values. And that's a checklist from their article in Technological Forecasting and Social Change 2006. That's Palm and Hanson, volume number 73, pages 543 to 558. Again, that's Technological Forecasting and Social Change. Very fascinating journal to read if you're looking at trends in futurist studies. And from what I gather, what comes to my mind in all this is to think about, we have that whole technological aspect that has become a lot more intense in terms of our policies. Think about some of the tracking devices, for example, that we have, and what's used, and what's online, the information online. I'll tell you, in one class I do an exercise where I have people go to a particular website and put in their name. And I'm going on and on and on, and what I notice is whoever has a computer is just not hearing me, doesn't know I'm there, and has a look of shock on their face, which is basically they cannot believe all that personal information that is out there for anyone to see on that particular website. It's a situation, again, we have to address the ethical issues related to that. Or what about those sites that post people who were arrested? Okay, they were arrested, but that doesn't mean they committed a crime. Maybe they were arrested, but there was no prosecution, no conviction. Is that ethical to present that? And then, that someone goes to look at someone to do background search using Google, and that's the first thing that comes up, and, forget that person getting a job, possibly. And then, finally, looking at the whole idea of ethical conflicts and decisions and how we practice that. And Rawls' theory on justice and fairness comes into play in his 2001 book, Justice and Fairness, a Restatement, published by Harvard University Press and edited by E. Kelly, focuses upon justice and social judgments. And in that book, there's a section on reflecting on our own judgment conflicts within ourselves and also between others, and how do we formulate these moral principles. So what? Now what? And Berger and Zijderveld, in their book In Praise of Doubt, How to Have Convictions Without Becoming a Fanatic, published in 2009 by HarperCollins, talks about the whole idea we have a lot more choices. And with policies, we have a lot more choices, and we have to start thinking about, well, what are the boundaries around those policies? And then they talk about the situation of relativism or too much doubt versus fundamentalism, not enough doubt. And I would say you can bring that into policy. Relativism, too much doubt over particular policies, and fundamentalism, not enough doubt over particular policies. And they talk about getting that healthy level of doubt. And I think that's really what we encourage in our criminal justice courses, is to be critical, and look at these policies and always have that doubt, saying, well, can we do better? What are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not working? And how can we assess this ethically, and how can we make sure that the policy is not only an ethical policy, but implemented and carried out in an ethical manner, and we are able to evaluate the ethical aspects of the consequences of the policy, the outcomes, what happens. So things are getting much more complex, and it's moving much quicker. And I'll wrap up by saying that I hope that we can always, think about ethics when we discuss policy. Thank you.